I never thought my quiet weekend at the lake cabin would turn into a showdown with flashing lights, blaring sirens, and a full SWAT team led by me. When an HOA busybody, known around Venny Borehood as Karen, called 911 to ruin my midnight gathering, she had no clue she was about to face the county's tactical commander, me. Let us know where you're watching from today. And, if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. I've always believed there's nothing quite like escaping to the lake when life gets too loud. My cabin sits at the far end of Cedar Pine Lake, tucked away behind a wall of tall pines and sweet-smelling cedar trees. It's an old log cabin I rebuilt with my own hands, each plank and nail hammered in on my days off from the county sheriff's office. To me, that place isn't just a getaway. It's a sanctuary where the world slows down and the noise fades into silence. That Friday evening, I tossed my overnight bag into the bed of my pickup and drove out of town with windows down, letting the warm summer breeze carry away the week's stress. The sky glowed orange as the sun dipped behind the hills, and the lake was calling me like an old friend. I had a simple plan: fire up the grill, enjoy a drink or two, and maybe play a little country music with some friends. Nothing wild, just good food, laughter, and second of peace you can't buy. By the time I arrived, the cabin was bathed in moonlight. I stepped out, inhaled that crisp night air, and felt an instant calm wash over me. The lake shimmered under the stars, and the only sound waste gentle lapping of water against the dock. I unlocked the cabin, flicked on the old lantern lights, and smiled as the familiar creak of the wooden floorboards greeted me home. An hour later, the grill was sizzling with steaks, the fire pit crackled, and a few friends had arrived, hauling coolers of soda and snacks. We set up Asmel's speaker and let some Johnny Cash hum in the background. Nothing about it was rowdy. Just a group of folks enjoying a quiet night away from the chaos of the city. I leaned back in my chair holding a cold beer and thought, this is exactly what I needed. That's when I heard the tires crunching on gravel. At first, I thought it might be a friend arriving late. But when I stepped onto the porch and saw the headlights of a shiny white SUV rolling up my private driveway, I knew it wasn't. I recognized that car. The HOA self-appointed enforcer, who we all called Karen, though that's not her real name, had arrived like a storm cloud. She had that way of showing up where she didn't belong. Armed with rules she barely understood and an attitude sharp enough to cut steel. The SUV door slammed open, and there she was, striding toward my cabin like she owned the place. She wore oversized sunglasses even at night, along with a spotless white blouse and beige pants that looked more suited for a country club than a quiet lakeside. Her expression was pure fire and disapproval. "What's going on here?" she demanded, as if she was interrogating me. "You can't have parties past 10 p.m. The HOA doesn't allow it." I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, this isn't here HOA territory. This cabin is on my private property outside of any hotel." My voice was calm, but I wasn't about to let her bulldoze over me. Her lips tightened. "I've already had complaints about noise. If you don't shut this down right now, I'm calling the police." I almost laughed. I said, taking a slow sip of my beer. "Go ahead." Of course, she had no idea who I was. I wasn't just some random guy grilling steaks at a cabin. I was the county sheriff. And more importantly, the tactical commander for our SWAT unit. If she thought I'd back down from a baseless threat, she was about to get a lesson she'd never She jabbed a finger toward the fire pit. "Mark my words. I'll have this place cleared out." Then she spun on her heel, stomped back to her SUV, and peeled out, her tires spitting gravel behind her. My friends glanced at me, unsure of what would happen next. "Don't worry about it. She doesn't know who she's dealing with." Still, her attitude stuck in my craw. It wasn't the first time Karen had meddled where she had no business. But calling the cops on my cabin party, that was a whole new level of arrogance. I had a feeling she was serious, and if she did call 911, she was in for the shock of her life. I leaned back against the porch railing, looking at the lake, the stars, and the soft glow of the firelight. My cabin was a place of peace, But sometimes, peace needs defending. That night, I made a quiet promise to myself. If she wanted to play games, I'd let her walk right into one she'd never. The night air was warm and still, filled with the scent of grilled meat and the faint crackle of firewood. My friends and I were just settling into a rhythm, sharing stories, sipping cold drinks, and letting the quiet lake soothe our nerves when the crunch of tires returned. I knew it was her before I even saw the headlights crest the hill. Karen wasn't done with me. Her white SUV came to a stop just beyond my gate, headlights glaring across the yard like interrogation lamps. Out she came, swinging her arms with purpose. Her sunglasses perched on her head like a crown she thought made her queen of I swear, the woman looked angrier than a cat dunked in cold water. Didn't I make myself clear? She snapped, as she marched across my property. I told you there's no noise allowed after 10. This is an HOA-regulated area. I stayed seated on the porch steps, resting my elbows on my knees, and let her rant. My friends fell quiet, exchanging puzzled looks. One of them whispered, "Does she know this isn't even HOA land?" I just gave him a subtle shake of my head. "This was my show to handle, Karen," I began, my voice steady but firm. "This cabin is outside off your HOA. It's my property. Your rules don't apply here. No matter how you wish they did." Her jaw dropped, as if I'd just spoken blasphemy. "Excuse 'em. Everything around this lake falls under the HOA. I know, because I chair the neighborhood committee. And you." She waved her manicured hand at me. "You're disturbing the peace." I stood up slowly, not in a threatening way, but to let her know she wasn't going to talk down to me like I was some teenager sneaking beers behind my parents' barn. I'm a big guy, 6'2" broad, from years of ranch work and palace training. When I stood to my full height, Karen's confidence flickered for just a second, though she quickly blistered on a fake smile. "Look," I said, "we're not breaking any laws. We're out here in the middle of nowhere, just having a quiet night with music and a fire. Nobody's bothering you. Quiet, quiet." "I can hear your music from down the road," she shouted, though I doubted she could even hear the faint strum of Johnny Cash from the porch speaker. She jabbed her finger toward my friends. "If you don't turn that off, I'll call 911. I'll have the police come and shut you down. You'll regret ignoring me." That's when I chuckled, and I could tell it made her furious. "Karen," I said slowly, "if you think calling 911 will help you, be my guest. But you might want to be careful what you wish for." Her eyes narrowed, and I could see her trying to figure out what I meant. I didn't give her the satisfaction of explaining. She spun on her heel and stumped back to her SUV, muttering under her breath. The sound of her tires spinning on gravel-ass left was almost comical. My friends erupted in laughter the second she was out of earshot. "Man, who is that woman?" asked Jake, my old high school buddy, who was leaning on the porch rail with a beer in hand. "She's like a drill sergeant on steroids." "She's the self-proclaimed HOA sheriff," I said, shaking my head. "Thinks she owns the whole county." Jake smirked. "She's about to learn the hard way who the real sheriff is." We all laughed at that, but I had a feeling things weren't done. Karen wasn't the type to back down quietly. Something about people like her, once they get a taste of control, they'll do anything to keep it. And I'd seen enough folks like her in my line of work to know she was planning her next move. Sure enough, less than 30 minutes later, I noticed the glow of a phone screen as she parked her SUV down the road and started making calls. E couldn't hear her words, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly who she was dialing. "Letter," I said, when Jake asked if I wanted to confront her. "I've got a better idea." I walked inside the cabin, pulled out my own radio from my bag, and made a quick call to dispatch. My team knows me, knows my tone. I didn't give it them every detail, but I made it clear we had a situation brewing, and I'd handle it personally. When I came back outside, my friends looked at me expectantly. "She's calling 911, isn't?" one of them asked. I nodded. "Yeah, and I'm about to give her exactly what she wants." The fire popped as I sat back down, watching the lake shimmer under the moonlight. I knew Karen thought she was summoning backup to put me in my place. What she didn't realize was that she just set the stage for one of the biggest shocks of her life. The night rolled on, and despite Karen's threats, I wasn't about to let her ruin what we had planned. I turned up the volume on the speaker just a notch, letting Johnny Cash's voice blend with the crackling fire and the quiet hum of crickets. Festas above Cedar Pine Lake looked like they had been scattered by hand, glowing bright and clear in the midnight sky. Nights like this were why I built Thickerbarn in the first place. To have a corner of the world where stress and petty drama couldn't reach me. Or, at least, that's what I thought. We gathered around the fire pit, plates loaded with steak potatoes and corn on the cob I'd grilled earlier. My buddy Jake, Tossadanathor, log on to the flames, sending sparks spiraling upward. "You sure she's not going to come back?" he asked, eyeing the road. "Oh, she'll be back," I said, smirking. "But this is my property. We're not breaking any laws, and I'm not about to bow to some HOA power trip," Jake chuckled. "I'd pay good money to see her face when she realizes she called 911 on the county sheriff himself." Another friend, Dan, raised his bottle. To Karen, he joked. The entertainment of us asked for. We all laughed, clinking bottles, the sound ringing out across the still water. I leaned back in my chair, the warm glow of the fire on my face, and looked out over the lake. The surface shimmered like black glass, reflecting the moonlight and our small circle of firelight. It was perfect, too perfect to be ruined by someone who thrived on making other people. But just as the night reached its peaceful peak, the distant wail of a siren cut through the silence. Jack turned to me, eyebrows raised. "Tell me that's not for us." I set down my drink and listened. The siren grew louder, closer. A small grin spread across my face. "Oh, it's for us. All right, but don't worry, I've got this handled." The others looked at me like I just announced the storm was coming. "Handled? What do you mean?" Dan asked. "You'll see," I said calmly, standing and walking toward the porch. A minute later, headlights glared through the trees as a police cruiser pulled up. Behind it, more lights. Not just one car, two, three, then a large armored van. My friends went silent, wide-eyed. "What the hell?" Jake whispered. I felt a familiar surge of authority as I walked toward the vehicles. The doors opened and outstepped my team. Men and women I'd trained with, trusted with my life. They were suited up in tactical gear, ready for action, because they thought this was an actual emergency. I'd made sure to keep it quiet. But now's moment had arrived. Karen, who had followed the convoy from a distance, pulled up right behind them, her Sav headlights blazing. She stepped out, looking smug like she just single-handedly solved the world's biggest problem. "There," she barked, pointing at us around the fire pit. "That's them. Arrest them all for disturbing the peace." The deputy in charge glanced at me, confused, before realization lit his face. "Sheriff, what's going on here?" I stepped forward, my boots crunching on the gravel, and couldn't help but smile. "Evening, folks. Thanks for coming out on such short notice," I said to my. Then I turned to Karen. "You called 911, right?" She blinked, clearly thrown off by my calm demeanor. "Well, yes, you are making noise and I'm with HOA. These people are breaking the rules." "Rules," I repeated, my voice cool but firm. "Karen, this is my property. We're not under your HOA, and there's no law against having a few friends over." Karen's face flushed. "But the noise, I can hear your music down the road." One of my deputies couldn't help but laugh. "Ma'am, I barely hear anything, and I'm standing 20 feet away." Her eyes darted from him to me, and finally it clicked. "Wait, you're the county sheriff," I corrected, pulling out my badge and holding it up so the firelight gleamed on the metal. "And the tactical commander for the SWAT team, UJ's dragged out here on a false emergency call." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. My team was already stifling grins. You can't do this." I stepped closer, my voice dropping low and firm. "Karen, calling 911 for anything other than a real emergency is a crime. You not only wasted law enforcement resources tonight, but you could have delayed help for someone who truly needed it. Isogest, you think long and hard about that before pulling this stunt again." The firelight flickered across her pale face. For once, she had no snappy comeback. She turned, stormed back to a SUV, and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. My team chuckled as I waved them off. False alarm, I said with a grin. Just a case of someone not knowing when to quit. Karen's SUV hadn't even fully disappeared down the gravel road before my phone buzzed with a dispatch notification. Sure enough, her call had come through as a serious disturbance and been flagged for potential escalation. Standard procedure for loud parties reported at midnight in rural areas. I sighed, shaking my head. This was no mistake. Karen had deliberately exaggerated every detail. I could already imagine the story she'd told: drunken brawls, screaming guests, chaos spilling into the road. The kind of nonsense that paints a peaceful night as a crime scene. Man, she actually did it, Jake muttered, staring after her taillights. You think she'll get in trouble for that? Oh, she'd get in trouble all right, I said with a slogrin. She just doesn't know how much yet. When I became sheriff, I made it my mission to teach people that calling 911 is not a tool for petty arguments or flexing personal grudges. False calls cost time, money, and sometimes lives. Karen had just crossed that line, and it was going to be my job to handle the fallout. My radio crackled. Sheriff, we've got a reported disturbance at Cedar Pine Lake. You're listed as nearest. Do you want backup rolling? I clicked my mic. Affirmative on backup, but I'll take point. Mikaja, everyone knows it's my property. I'll debrief on scene. There was a pause, then a laugh from one of mid. Copy that. Guessing this has Karen's fingerprints on it. Bingo. Within the hour, I had coordinated a quiet approach with my team. I didn't want flashing lights or a scene that would scare my guests. I wanted to handle this like the professional I was, but I also wanted Karen to see that her games had consequences. The SWAT van and cruisers stayed back until I signaled them, just far enough to let Karen think she was getting her wish. Meanwhile, I explained the situation to my friends. Look, this isn't the first time someone's tried to pull rank around here. But tonight, she picked the wrong guy. Just relax. I'll handle it. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. I can't believe this is happening. We're literally at the quietest party in history. I stepped away from the fire and called dispatch again to confirm Karen's statement. The report she'd filed was almost laughable. She claimed there were dozens of rowdy drunks stealing and firing off fireworks. Not a single word of it was true. Well, I muttered under my breath. If she wants to escalate, I'll give her a front row seat. By the time Karen reappeared, trailing behind the flashing lights of the incoming convoy, her smugness was practically radiating. She stepped out of her SUV, arms crossed, chin high, ready to watch me get put in my place. Officers, over here, she shouted, as if she were the commander. This is Thea. Arrest them all. I could see the confusion on my deputies' faces. They were used to following my lead, and here was this woman barking orders like she owned the lake. I gave a subtle nod to Deputy Harris, the youngest of my crew, and he smirked, clearly understanding the setup. Evening, ma'am, he said, voice neutral but firm. Can you confirm your emergency report? Yes, it told you. They're having some wild party noise, fireworks, who knows what else. They woke me up. I stepped forward, hands on my belt. Karen, are you absolutely sure about that report? She blinked at me. Of course, I'm sure. Just listen to them. Wait, she froze, suddenly realizing that the voice addressing her wasn't just any deputy. Her eyes narrowed as they scanned my... You, that's right, I said, pulling my badge from my jacket. Sapphire light caught the polished metal as I held it up. Sheriff of this county. And you, Karen, just called in a false 911 report on my property. Her mouth fell open. You're the sheriff, last I checked, I said coolly. And I have to tell you, Karen, wasting emergency resources is a serious offense. You pulled a full SWAT team off their route tonight because you couldn't handle a few folks having a quiet evening. Do you understand how dangerous that is? Her eyes darted nervously between the deputies who stood behind me like a wall of authority. I didn't know. I thought you thought wrong, I interrupted. And no, you're going to answer for it. I nodded at Harris, who pulled out a notepad. Ma'am, I need your statement on False reporting can carry fines or even jail time depending on intent. I strongly suggest you tell the truth here, Karen sputtered, glancing between all of us. Her confidence evaporating like mist on the lake. My friends were watching from the porch, silent, but clearly enjoying the spectacle. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice, but keeping it firm. Karen, I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to make sure you understand that calling 911 is not a toy. If you'd like, I can escort you to the station right now so we can go over it in detail. Her face turned pale. No, to get it. I smiled faintly. Good, then we'll leave it at that for now. The night air grew heavier, filled with the unmistakable tension that follows a confrontation like that. Karen stood frozen by her SUV, arms crossed and face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. I could see it in her. She wasn't used to being challenged, and certainly not like this. I had no interest in humiliating her further, but I needed her to understand that she had crossed a line that could have serious consequences. I turned to Tummy Team, nodding once. Secure the perimeter. I want lights and positions, just as if this were a real call. Let's show her what it means to mobilize a SWAT unit. My deputies, who knew exactly what I was doing, quickly fell into. The convoy's lights flickered on, splashing red and blue across the pines and the cabin's front yard. A few of my team members moved with quiet efficiency, their gear clinking softly as they took positions around Vic. It wasn't a show meant to scare my friends, if anything. They were safe and amused, but this was about driving a lesson home for Karen. Her eyes widened. Wait, what are they doing? She asked, her voice sharp with what you wanted. I said calmly. You called 911 for a Now the county's finest tactical team is here to ensure order. Congratulations, Karen, you got the full response. One of my deputies, Harris, gave her a long look. Ma'am, we don't roll a SWAT team lightly. We're here because false calls, like yours, wasted taxpayer dollars and put lives at risk. Someone else could have needed us tonight. Karen's mouth opened, but nothing came out. For the first time, I think she really understood what kind of fire she'd been playing with. I motioned to Jake and Dan, who stood by the porch. You guys all right? Jake grinned. Better than all right. I'm just glad I didn't miss this show. Dan laughed. This is the best entertainment I've had in months. I cracked a smile before turning serious again. I walked toward the tactical van, radioing my second-in-command. Bring the rest of the team up. I want her to see what a real deployment looks like. Within minutes, 3 more officers stepped out. Fully geared in tactical vests and helmets, moving with the precision that comes from They weren't acting. They were simply doing their job. But the sight of them alone was enough to make Karen's posture stiffen like a wooden fence post. Why are there so many of you? She demanded, her voice trembling slightly. Because Karen, I said, walking back toward. A call like yours is treated as a potential high-risk incident. My men and women are trained to handle dangerous situations. If you think wasting their time is a joke, let me assure you it isn't. The firelight glinted off my badge as I stepped closer. You called for backup, and here they are. But tonight, Karen, they're not here for me. They're here to see just how far you are willing to take this nonsense. Her face went pallid. I could tell she was running through every possible way to backpedal without losing face. I was just trying to keep order. You don't get to define order. I cut in. My tone, firm but controlled. Especially not on private land, that doesn't fall under your HOA. You want to enforce the rules, stick to your own property lines. The team began checking the area's standard protocol, but I could feel Karen shrinking under the weight of it. Every flashlight beam, every clippered radio transmission was a reminder that she'd stirred up something way beyond her authority. Finally, I decided it waste time to dial things down. All right, team, I called out. Stand down, full support, no threat. We're wrapping this up, one by one. My deputies returned tough vehicles, some shaking their heads, others chuckling under their breath. Harris gave Karen a final look and said, You're lucky the sheriff's handling this personally. Most folks get fined on the spot for this. Karen shot me a glare, but her voice was softer now. You're making me look foolish. I leaned on the hood of her SUV, my voice calm, but edged with steel. No, Karen, you did that yourself. Tonight's on you. The sooner you realize that, the better off we'll all be. She didn't have ours. She just grabbed her keys, climbed into her SUV, and slammed the door so hard it echoed across the lake. I watched her taillights vanish again. A cloud of dust trailing behind her. Jake walked over, shaking his head. I have to hand it to you. That was one way to put her in her place. Yeah, Donna added, chuckling. I almost feel bad for her. Almost, I sighed, watching the flashing lights fade as my team cleared out. She needed to learn that authority isn't about yelling the loudest. It's about knowing when to step up and when to back off. The clearing was quiet again once the last cruiser's lights faded into the darkness. My friends were still buzzing from the whole ordeal, replaying every second of Karen's meltdown like kids who had just witnessed the winning touchdown. I leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, looking out over the lake while my mind replayed something else. The stunned look on Karen's face when she realized I was the sheriff. That moment alone was worth the trouble she'd caused. Jake chuckled, shaking his head as he took another sip of beer. Man, the look on her face when you showed your badge, priceless. I thought she was going to faint right there, on spot. Dan grinned. I've seen some wild stuff in my life, but I swear this tops the list. She thought she was in charge until you stepped up in that uniform and turned the tables. I smiled faintly. People like Karen thrive on thinking they've got power over others. It's easy to act tough when you think rules are on your side. But when reality shows up, especially with a badge and a SWAT team, things look a wild lot different. The fire crackled, sending embers drifting into the starry sky. I grabbed my jacket from the back of a chair and put it on, the sheriff's insignia on the sleeve, catching the firelight. I hadn't meant for the evening to turn into a showdown. But once she decided to call 911 and drag my team into it, I knew I had to set things straight. As if on cue, headlights glared down the driveway again. My friends froze for a second, thinking Karen was back for round 3. But this time I recognized the vehicle, one of my own deputies, Harris. Pulling up to check in before heading back to the station, he stepped out of the cruiser, still smiling from earlier. Sheriff, you handled that better than anyone else could have. You want me to file the incident report? Yeah, I said, nodding. Make sure you include the part about her false claims. I don't want this getting swept under the rug. Folks need to know we don't tolerate wasting image. Harris glanced at my friends and grinned. You guys picked one heck of a night to hang out with the sheriff. No kidding, Jake said, laughing. Does Thishapan often out here? Not like this, I replied. Usually, it's raccoons tipping over the trash cans, or maybe a neighbor's dog wandering off. But Karen, she's on a whole different level. We are load. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the last time I'd hear from her. Karen wasn't the type to let things go. She'd probably spend the next week cooking up some new complaint, maybe even trying to rally other HOA members to her side. That thought didn't bother me. If she wanted another fight, I'd be ready. I decided to go inside for a minute and grab something. When I came back out, I was wearing my full tactical vest, not to intimidate anyone, but to drive the point home once and for all. The sight made my friends whistle and laugh. Dang, Don said. You look like you're about to lead a mission. Not far from the truth, I said, smiling. Just then, another car slowed at the end of the driveway. This time, it was Karen again. She must have circled round the lake. And now she was back, except this time she didn't storm out of the SUV. She rolled down the window, peering out nervously. I walked down the driveway, stopping a few feet from her car. Karen, I said evenly, you wanted the police involved. Well, here I am, and here's the team you called for. You've made your point, but I need you to understand something. You don't have the authority you think you do. Not here, not tonight. Not ever on my property. Her mouth opened, but I held up a hand to stop her. I'm not your enemy, Karen. I'm the one who responds in. Real emergencies happen when people's lives are on the line. Do you have any idea what could have happened if? My team had rolled into a real firefight because they were tied up here over nothing. She didn't answer. Her eyes darted down, and for the first time, she looked genuinely uncertain. "Go home," I said quietly, but firmly. "Enjoy your night. And the next time you feel the urge to call 911 over something petty, remember this moment." For a long second, she just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. Then, without a word, she rolled up the window and drove away. Slower this time, without the angry roar of tires. I turned back to my friends who were grinning from ear to ear. "Well," Jake said, "I think that's the first time I've ever seen Karen speechless." "Let's hope it's not the last," I replied. The rest of the night felt lighter. We stoked the fire, played a few old songs on the speaker, and laughed about everything that had happened. For all the chaos Karen tried to stir up, the evening ended up being one we'd never forget. The following morning, I woke to the sound of loons calling across Cedar Pine Lake and the faint smell of wood smoke lingering from last night's fire. My friends were still asleep inside the cabin, sprawled on the couches and bunks. But I was already up sipping my first cup of black coffee on the porch. The quiet morning felt like a sharp contrast to the chaos Karen had stirred up hours before. As I sat there, I thought about everything that had gone down. It wasn't just about her trying to ruin a party. It was about someone abusing authority they didn't have. That didn't sit right with me. Not as a sheriff, and not as someone who believes in fair play. I knew I had to take the next step. Not to humiliate Karen Buto, hold her accountable for what she'd done. By mid-morning, Harris radioed in to let me know the incident report was ready. "Sheriff," he said, "I've got the statement written up, including Thethel's claims she made." Dispatch recorded her call. She made it sound like there was a violent brawl out there. "Good work," I replied. "File it with the county attorney's office. I'll handle the follow-up." Around noon, I got into me pickup and drove down to the HOA office. A small building with polished glass doors and a row of neatly trimmed hedges out front. As I walked in, Karen was already there, talking animatedly with another board member. When she saw me, the color drained from her face. "Oh, great," she muttered. "What are you doing here?" I kept my voice, calm but firm. "Karen, we need to talk. I filed a report about the false 911 call you made last night. It's on record now." Her eyes widened. "You can't be..." "I was just enforcing the rules. You don't have any authority outside HOA grounds," I said, stepping closer. "So we're eye to eye. And you don't get to weaponize emergency services because you don't like someone's music. That's not enforcement. That's harassment." The board member standing beside her shifted uncomfortably. "Karen, did you really call 911 over a party?" She shot him a glare, but didn't answer. I took that as my cue to finish what I came for. "Karen, here's what's going to happen. I'm not pressing for jail time yet, but you're going to pay the fine for false reporting, and you're going to stay off my property. If you step foot there again without a legitimate reason, we'll have a different conversation, and I won't be nearly as forgiving." For a moment, I thought she might explode, but then her shoulders slumped. "Fine," she hissed. "But this isn't over." I tilted my head slightly. "That's where you're wrong. It is over as far as I'm concerned. You've got a choice, live and let live, or keep poking the bear and see how that ends." When I turned to leave, I heard the board member whisper, "Karen, maybe it's time you back off." That was enough for me. Driving back to Thekabin, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Justice, in my book, isn't it's about balance. Karen had overstepped, and now she'd learned that there are limits, even for someone who thinks they run the show. When I got back, my friends were sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, enjoying the warm sunlight glinting off the water. So Jake asked, leaning forward, "How to go handled?" I said with a grin, "She's paying the fine, and I think we won't be hearing from her for a while." Don raised his mug in a toast to the sheriff and tosheting down HOA nonsense once and for all. We all laughed, and I sat down beside them, letting the breeze off the lake cool my skin. "Last night was wild," I said, "but I'll tell you what, nothing feels better than standing your ground and knowing you did the right thing." Ask day wore on, We cleaned up the remnants of the party, grilled some leftover steaks, and even took the boat out for a slow ride around the lake. The peace I'd come out here for had returned, and it felt better knowing I'd earned it. By sundown, the sky was painted with streaks of gold and pink. I stood at the end of the dock, hands in my pockets, watching the water ripple in the fading light. For all of Karen's drama, she'd given me one thing, a reminder of why I love this place. Out here, I wasn't just the sheriff. I was Eamon, who built his life around honesty, hard work, and knowing when to push back. The sun had just set, leaving a band of crimson and gold across the horizon. When I finally felt the tension of the last 24 hours lift from Miss Holders, the lake was calm again, a sheet of glass reflecting the glow of the fire pit we'd rekindled for one last night together. My friends and I sat in easy silence, the kind that only comes after you've faced down chaos and come out stronger on the other side. Jake poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the night. "You know," he said with a grin, "that woman's going to think twice before she calls 911 again." I almost wish I'd filmed her face when you walked out in full tactical gear. That moment alone, legendary. I chuckled, shaking my head. Karen Stobin, I'll give her that. But last night wasn't just about shutting her up. It was about showing her where the line. Some folks think they can scream rules and watch everyone jump. Well, not 'em. Not out here. Dan nodded, leaning back in his chair. What you did was justice, plain and simple. Not just for you, but for everyone she's pushed around over there. She finally ran into someone who wouldn't let her bulldoze them. I thought about that for a moment, staring Gento. The fire. It wasn't the first time I'd had to confront someone who believed they had power over others, and it wouldn't be the last. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't just wearing the badge. I was standing up for my home, my friends, and the peace we held. As the night deepened, I found myself walking down to the dock. The boards creaked under my boots, and the moon cast a silver path across the lake. I could hear my friends laughing behind me, their voices soft against the hum of crickets. I took a deep breath of the cool night air and let it settle in my chest. Karen's face kept flashing through my mind, not out of anger, but as a reminder. People like her rarely understand the weight of their actions until someone holds up a mirror. She'd called 911 thinking she could win. All she'd done was waste time, disrupt lives, and embarrass herself. Part of me hoped she'd learn something from it. Back on the porch, Jake handed me a fresh beer. "To the sheriff," he said, raising his bottle, "and to never letting HOA Karen ruin a good weekend." I clinked my bottle against his. "To standing your ground," I replied. The laughter rolled on. And for a while, we forgot all about Karen and her antics. We talked about old fishing trips, our favorite country songs, and the memories we'd made out here at the cabin over the years. This place wasn't just a piece of land. It was a slice of freedom, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that from me. Later, as the fire burned low, I took a moment to thank my friends for sticking by me. "You guys didn't sign up for all this drama," I said with a grin. "But you stayed anyway. That means a lot, Jex. We'd follow you through worse than an HOA meltdown. Besides, watching you handle her like that, worth every second." Dan laughed. "You know, you ought to tell this story more often. Folks could use a reminder that standing up to bullies doesn't always require shouting. Sometimes, it just takes quiet confidence and the right people in your corner." He was right. As I looked around at my friends, the firelight dancing in their eyes, I realized that's what this whole thing was about. Not just facing down Karen or her false 911 call, but proving that no one can intimidate you when you know who you are and what you stand for. When the night finally grew quiet, I walked down to the lake one last time. The water was still, reflecting the moon and stars like a perfect mirror. I thought about the cabin, the lake, and everything I'd built here with my own two hands. This was my place, my slice of peace in a world that too often forgets how to slow down. "Let Karen stew," I muttered softly. "She can bark all she wants. But this," I gestured at the water, the sky, and the cabin glowing faintly behind me. "This is mine." With that thought in my heart, I headed back to the porch where my friends were waiting. I knew tomorrow we'd pack up and head back to the grind-off daily life. But tonight was ours, untouchable and sweet. Sometimes life puts people like Karen in your path to test your patience, your courage, and your boundaries. But when you stand your ground, stay calm, and remember your principles, you'll always come out strong. If you enjoyed this story, take a moment to reflect on a time you stood up for yourself and won. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice, grit, and unexpected twists. Who knows, the next one might just remind you of your own story.